All right, so after more than 50 years, we're finally sending people back to the moon. It's a huge deal. But you know what's wild? The most dangerous part of this whole thing isn't getting to the moon. Nope, it's getting home. Let's break down the absolutely incredible challenge facing the crew of Artemis II. Mach 33. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the unbelievable speed the Orion capsule is traveling when it hits our atmosphere on the way back from the moon. We're talking mind-bendingly fast.
Yeah, that's 33 times the speed of sound. To give you some context, no crewed spaceship has had to deal with that kind of speed since the Apollo days. I mean, it is just an almost unimaginable velocity to have to survive.
And, that kind of speed creates an insane amount of friction. Which brings us to our next number, 3,000 degrees. That is the scorching hot temperature the outside of the spacecraft has to deal with as it just rips through the atmosphere.
So this is what it all boils down to. The single biggest, most important test of the entire Artemis II mission, it's that violent, fiery plunge back to Earth. Seriously, surviving the trip home, that's everything.
And this trial by fire, it's really the final exam, right? A super high-stakes test for NASA's whole new generation of deep space tech. And it's the peak of what is a truly historic mission. So, to really get why this moment is so heavy, you gotta look back. This mission is something we've been waiting for over half a century. Okay, so think about this. The last time people were on the moon was 1972 with Apollo 17. After that, nothing. We just took a really long break from deep space. It wasn't until 2022 that we sent up Artemis I. That was the uncrewed flight, the dress rehearsal, to prove the new rocket and capsule could actually do the trip. And now, Artemis II is the real deal, carrying the first crew back to lunar orbit. So this whole 10-day flight was basically what you'd call a shakedown cruise, like the final full-scale test drive. First, they had to prove the monster SLS rocket works with a crew strapped in. Next, they had to check that all of Orion's life support systems actually, support life in deep space. But the biggest thing, the one we keep coming back to, was proving the capsule could survive that insane reentry. Get this right, and you pave the way for Artemis III, and actually landing people back on the moon. And yeah, getting to this point, it comes with a hefty price tag. We're talking $55 billion. That's how much NASA had spent by the time Artemis II launched, just on developing the rocket, the Orion capsule, and all the ground systems to make it happen. So yeah, you could say the stakes couldn't be any higher. But look, all that expensive hardware is just a pile of metal without the people inside. So let's talk about the real heart of this mission, the 4 astronauts who are literally making history. And here they are. You've got Commander Reid Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and then mission specialist Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen from the Canadian Space Agency. I love this. They named their capsule Integrity. How perfect is that for a mission that's been built on decades of hard work? And this crew, wow, they represent so many incredible firsts. Christina Koch is the first woman ever to fly a lunar mission. Victor Glover is the first Black astronaut to fly to the moon, and Jeremy Hansen is the first non-American to make the trip. I mean, this selection sends such a powerful message, doesn't it? It really reflects a brand new, much more inclusive era for space exploration. And this quote from Commander Reid Wiseman really just perfectly captures the spirit of the mission. He said, "What we really hoped in our soul is that we could, for just a moment, have the world pause. It's that idea that by going way out there, you give everyone back here a chance to reflect on our home. It's that classic overview effect that the Apollo astronauts talk so much about." And man, what a perspective they got. It came from a vantage point that no one has seen with their own eyes in 50 years. And it happened on a journey that took them farther away from Earth than any human has ever been. I mean, just look at this. This is an Earth set as seen from Orion. Can you imagine seeing our entire world, that tiny, fragile blue marble, just dipping behind the gray, barren horizon of the moon? It's a profound sight, and this crew got to see it for themselves. 252,756 miles. As they swung around the far side of the moon, that's how far from home they got. And in doing so, they actually broke the old record for the farthest humans have ever been from Earth, a record that was held by the crew of Apollo 13 way back in 1970. And, to make sure everyone back on Earth felt connected to their incredible journey, the crew brought along a very special little passenger. This is Rise, a plush toy that was actually designed by an 8-year-old for a NASA competition.
It's their zero-gravity indicators, so when it starts floating, they know they're in space. It's just such a great human touch on this super high-tech mission.
But okay, after all the amazing views and the record-breaking distances, the whole journey always circled back to one single thing, that final, fiery test of survival.
And here's the irony. You see this incredible raw power of the SLS, the most powerful rocket ever built, the very thing you need to throw Orion all the way to the moon? Well, that's exactly what makes the return so dangerous. All of that insane orbital energy has to be scrubbed off in just a few short, incredibly violent minutes in the atmosphere. And there's a specific reason why engineers were watching this reentry so closely. So on the uncrewed Artemis I flight, they found some unexpected damage to the heat shield. It wore away in ways that were a little concerning. That discovery basically made the Artemis II reentry priority number 1. They had to be absolutely sure that shield would work perfectly, because this time, 4 human lives depended on it.
So what is this heat shield exactly? Well, it's what's called an ablative shield, which is kind of a weird concept. It's not designed to just block the heat. It's actually designed to burn away on purpose, but in a very controlled way. As it burns, it creates this layer of gas that carries all that insane heat away from the capsule and the crew inside. It is, without a doubt, the single most critical piece of gear for getting them home alive.
So with the success of Artemis II, we're one giant leap closer to putting boots back on the moon and then, eventually, on Mars. But it also leaves us with this huge monumental question, right? This single 10-day flight was the result of a $55 billion investment. So as we start looking toward even bigger goals farther out in the solar system, you just have to ask, what is the price of the future?
For the first time in more than 50 years, we are going back to the moon. I mean, think about that. The Artemis II mission is so much more than just a test flight. It's truly the next giant leap for humankind. It's a 10-day journey that's going to push the absolute limits of exploration. So, who are the 4 incredible people who signed up for this ride? Well, let's meet them.
So yeah, who are these pioneers? You know, this mission, it really represents a whole new era of space travel. And the crew itself is a perfect reflection of that change. These are the faces of a new generation of explorers, and they were literally chosen to carry the hopes of the entire world on their shoulders.
And that brings us right here to humanity's crew. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson said it best. He said, "This is their crew, this is our crew, this is humanity's crew." So, okay, let's meet them.
Okay, so leading the charge, we have Commander Reid Wiseman. He's a former naval aviator and test pilot, and he's already got experience on the International Space Station. At the controls is pilot Victor Glover, also a naval aviator, and he was the first African American to live on the ISS for a long-duration mission. Then we have mission specialist Christina Koch, an electrical engineer who holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman, an absolutely incredible 328 days in space. And making his very first trip to space is mission specialist Jeremy Hansen of the Canadian Space Agency. He's a former fighter pilot who has been waiting for this flight for 14 years. Talk about patience.
But, you know, this crew isn't just impressive on paper. They are historic. I mean, look at this. Christina Koch will be the first woman to ever fly around the moon. Victor Glover will be the first person of color. And Jeremy Hansen, the first non-American. This crew was specifically chosen to represent all of humanity on this monumental journey. All right, we've met the crew. Now let's talk about the journey itself. This mission wasn't just about who was flying. It was about how incredibly far they were going to go.
The plan was a flight test that would last nearly 10 days. Now, they weren't landing on the moon this time out. You can think of it more like a shakedown cruise. The main goal here was to push the Orion spacecraft to its absolute limits, to prove that its life support, its navigation, and especially its re-entry technology were ready for the even bigger challenges ahead.
And they didn't just go to the moon. They went right on past it. On their lunar flyby, the Artemis II crew set a brand new record for the farthest humans have ever traveled from our home planet. They pushed more than 4,000 miles beyond the old record, which, by the way, was held for over 50 years by the crew of Apollo 13.
And from that incredible vantage point, looking back at our home, the crew shared some really profound thoughts. Christina Koch described this feeling of seeing our planet just hanging there in the total blackness of space.
She said it wasn't about borders or differences. It was this powerful, powerful reminder of our shared and kind of fragile existence on this tiny blue marble. But here's the thing, getting there is only half the battle. And now we get to the most critical, most nerve-wracking phase of the whole trip, the high-stakes return. Coming home from the moon is, without a doubt, one of the most dangerous things a human being can do. Just let that question sink in for a second. What happens when you hit the atmosphere at Mach 33? This isn't like a plane landing. It's a controlled, high-energy collision with our own planet, and absolutely everything has to go perfectly. This whole phase is called hypersonic reentry. It's that moment when the spacecraft gets hit with the most extreme forces and temperatures of the entire mission. It's all because the friction of the atmosphere has to violently slam on the brakes, slowing it down from over 25,000 miles per hour. And this really shows you why coming back from the moon is so much riskier than coming back from, say, the International Space Station. The kinetic energy goes up with the square of the speed, so the Orion capsule, traveling at nearly 11 kilometers per second, had to get rid of over twice the energy of a ship coming back from low Earth orbit. All of that energy has to go somewhere, and it turns into heat, just staggering amounts of it. The Orion heat shield had to withstand temperatures of nearly 3,000 degrees Celsius. To give you some perspective, that's about half the temperature of the surface of the sun. The crew's survival depended 100% on that shield doing its job flawlessly. And the risk is very, very real. Before the launch, Jeremy Hansen was incredibly honest about this. He said he actually walked his own family through all the dangers. And this wasn't about scaring them. It was about acknowledging the profound risks that you just can't separate from real, true exploration. And of course, that risk is felt just as sharply by the families back on the ground. Jeremy's wife, Catherine, shared that while the mission was full of joy and excitement, there was always this constant underlying anxiety, just wanting him and the whole crew to get home safe. The entire return sequence is like a perfectly timed high-stakes dance. It all starts with that fiery gauntlet of hypersonic reentry. That's followed by a whole series of parachutes deploying to slow the capsule down, and it all ends with a gentle splashdown in the Pacific Ocean where recovery teams are already waiting. So after all that tension, all that risk, what was the result? Well, that brings us to our final section, pioneering moon joy. Because the end of this mission wasn't just a technical success. It was a full-blown cultural phenomenon. And this term, moon joy, it just captures the feeling perfectly. The world wasn't just watching another space mission. People were totally captivated by the story. From social media to the news headlines, the record-breaking journey and this diverse, inspiring crew created a wave of excitement that just rippled across the entire globe. And so, after 10 days in deep space, the moment of truth finally arrived. The Orion capsule, which the crew had named Integrity, blazed through the atmosphere and splashed down safely in the Pacific. The mission was a total, resounding success. You know, in the end, this mission was about so much more than testing hardware or setting records. Like Commander Reid Wiseman said, it was about giving the world a moment to just pause, to look up, and to remember what a precious and beautiful home we all share. Artemis II was a journey to the moon, but maybe, just maybe, its most important lesson was all about appreciating our own planet, Earth. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are breaking down what is arguably one of the most dangerous moments in all of modern spaceflight, the return of the 4 Artemis II astronauts from the moon. They're going to be inside the Orion capsule Integrity, on a trip home that pushes engineering, well, to its absolute limit. Okay, let's just jump right in with a number that kind of sets the stage for everything. 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the temperature the outside of the Orion capsule will have to endure as it screams back into Earth's atmosphere. And to put that in perspective, we're talking about half as hot as the surface of the sun. Surviving this is the final fiery test of the whole mission. So you might be asking, why is this so much more intense than astronauts coming home from, say, the International Space Station? Well, it's not just about going faster. It's about hitting a target the size of a keyhole from 250,000 miles away at an angle so incredibly precise there is basically zero room for error. Now, what's really interesting here is just how the physics scales up. You see, coming back from the moon means you're slamming into the atmosphere at almost 25,000 miles per hour. And since kinetic energy increases with the square of your velocity, that higher speed nearly doubles the energy that has to be burned off as heat. And here's the really nail-biting part. If you come in too steep, the forces and heat are just unsurvivable.
But if you come in too shallow by even a single degree, the capsule could literally skip off the atmosphere like a stone on water, lost in space forever.
You see, at these speeds, the capsule's moving so fast the air just can't get out of the way. It compresses violently, creating this shockwave of ionized gas, plasma, that's thousands of degrees. And this plasma is so hot it actually radiates heat that scorches the spacecraft without even touching it. That's the incredible challenge the heat shield is built to beat. So, to test all this, NASA flew the uncrewed Artemis I mission. And look, it was a spectacular success by almost every measure. It sent Orion farther than any human-rated spacecraft in history. But when the capsule was fished out of the Pacific, engineers discovered a really serious and totally unexpected problem. You have to understand, the heat shield is pretty much the single most critical piece of hardware for crew survival. So when it was put to the test under real-world reentry conditions for the very first time, everyone was holding their breath. What the engineers found when they finally got it back on dry land was pretty alarming. Yeah, this image really shows the problem perfectly. The shield was not supposed to do this. Instead of burning away smoothly and predictably, chunks of the charred material had cracked and been totally ripped away, leaving over 100 of these pockmarks and cavities. This was a type of failure that none of the computer models had predicted. And the official watchdog report from NASA's Office of Inspector General, well, they were blunt. They didn't mince words. This wasn't some minor flaw. It was a significant risk to the crew of Artemis II. And the fear wasn't just about heat getting through. It was also that this flying debris could potentially damage one of the all-important parachutes. So what happened? NASA immediately put together what they call a Tiger team, basically a dream team of experts from all different fields to investigate the root cause. Their job was to become forensic engineers, to figure out exactly why the shield failed in this way. Okay, first, let's just be really clear on how the shield is supposed to work. The whole process is called ablation. This special material, it's called AVCOAT, is designed to char and then controllably burn away, literally carrying the extreme heat of reentry away with it. It's a sacrificial layer that protects everything and everyone inside. And what the Tiger team found was this really complex chain reaction. As the AVCOAT material heated up, it created gases inside. But the material wasn't porous enough to let those gases escape, so pressure just built up internally. This pressure, when you combine it with all the other stresses of reentry, essentially caused parts of the shield to just pop off. And here is the crucial piece of the puzzle. A huge part of the problem was the re-entry path itself. You see, Artemis I used what's called a skip entry. It dipped into the atmosphere, kind of pulled back out for a bit, and then re-entered again. And that cycle of heating, cooling, and then reheating, it made the outer char layer brittle and way more likely to crack under that internal gas pressure. So this discovery created a massive problem. The heat shield for Artemis II was already built and installed. A hardware redesign was completely out of the question. So if NASA couldn't change the shield, they had to change the environment it would fly through. They had to change the flight plan. And this is that change. Instead of that gentler two-stage skip entry, Artemis II is going to use a steeper, faster, and more direct, lofted entry. This new profile keeps the heat and pressure on the shield more constant, and that avoids that dangerous thermal cycling. And look at the G-forces. While the peak is almost the same at around 4 Gs, the experience for the crew will be totally different. Instead of two separate pushes into their seats, they're going to face one single, sustained deceleration. It's a shorter, much more intense ride, but it's all designed to keep that char layer from breaking away. So what we're looking at here is a classic engineering trade-off. This new flight path, it reduces the risk to the heat shield, but it comes at a cost, a less precise landing. The splashdown zone widens from a tiny 2-mile radius to a 10-mile radius. And that means mission control and the Navy recovery teams have a much bigger patch of ocean to cover. But it's a calculated risk where crew safety is put way above pinpoint accuracy and easy logistics. So now let's talk about what all this means for the 4 astronauts who are actually going to be inside that capsule. I mean, they've trained for years, but their lives really do depend on these engineering calculations being right. And as it turns out, the heat shield isn't the only risk they're thinking about. Right, so the post-flight analysis of Artemis I also turned up some other worrying things, like unexpected melting on crucial separation bolts and a whole series of power glitches. Now, NASA has put fixes in place for Artemis II, but these issues just go to show how many different systems all have to work absolutely perfectly for a safe return. But, despite all these known issues, NASA officials and the Artemis II crew have all publicly said they're confident in the new plan. And this quote, I think it really captures the soul of human spaceflight. The engineers provide all the data and analysis, but at the end of the day, it's the astronauts who have to stake their lives on it. And after surviving that 5,000-degree inferno of reentry, their fate rests on this: a super complex sequence of parachutes that have to deploy perfectly to slow the capsule from over 300 miles per hour to a gentle splashdown speed of less than 20. It is the final, absolutely nail-biting step in a very long journey home. And this really brings us to our final thought here. The story of the Artemis II heat shield isn't just about engineering, right? It's about the fundamental nature of exploration itself. It's a process. You fly, you find unexpected problems, you learn from them, and then you make calculated risks to keep pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible. Getting to the moon is hard. We all know that. But after more than 50 years, I think we sometimes forget that the single most dangerous part of the entire journey is coming home. Plunging back into our atmosphere at speeds that can melt solid rock is this incredible exercise in controlled violence. And for NASA's Artemis I mission, it turns out this return was way more dangerous than anyone knew. So on this first uncrewed flight of the Artemis program, NASA's Orion capsule had to face this trial by fire. And while the whole world saw a flawless return, behind the scenes, a completely different story was unfolding. A story that revealed the mission had actually skirted the edge of total disaster. And that poses a really profound question for the first crewed flight in half a century. And this was the image, right? This was the triumphant shot that capped off the whole Artemis I mission. After pushing farther into space than any human-rated spacecraft ever, the Orion capsule just splashes down perfectly in the Pacific. I mean, to the public, it was an absolute textbook success. But then engineers got the capsule back on dry land, and they started taking a closer look. And what they found was, well, it was shocking. Instead of a smoothly worn-down heat shield, they saw this. These deep cavities, chunks of material just gone. The shield that was supposed to protect the capsule hadn't just worn away. It had broken apart. And suddenly, that picture-perfect ending looked very, very different. Okay, so this discovery kicks off a massive investigation. And the crucial question wasn't just what happened, but why it happened. And most importantly, could it happen again, this time with astronauts on board? The scale of this problem was just alarming. This wasn't one or two little isolated spots. No, NASA engineers found over 100 locations where the protective material had been unexpectedly ripped away. This was a systemic issue, and it pointed to a really fundamental misunderstanding of how this heat shield was supposed to behave under the extreme stress of reentry. All right, let's break this down. What was supposed to happen versus what actually did. The shield was designed for a process called ablation. The idea is that the material chars and just erodes smoothly and predictably, carrying all that intense heat away with it. But what happened was something engineers have now termed char liberation. It means the shield cracked and violently broke off in fragments, creating this trail of debris that could have easily damaged the capsule's parachutes. And it gets worse. Engineers also found another critical failure. See these separation bolts? 3 of the 4 main ones embedded in the heat shield had severely melted and eroded. This created a gap that could have let 5,000-degree plasma get behind the heat shield, and that would have been catastrophic. We're talking about the breakup of the entire vehicle. So with these 2 potentially mission-ending flaws staring them in the face, NASA did what they do best. They assembled what's called a Tiger Team, basically a group of the best experts from across the agency and industry. And they had one job: solve this engineering mystery before astronauts strapped into the next flight. Now, to really get what went wrong, we first have to understand how the shield is supposed to work. This process, ablation, is the core principle. The material is literally designed to burn away, sacrificing its outer layers to protect the structure and, of course, the crew underneath. It's a tried and true method that goes all the way back to the Apollo era. But the key to this whole mystery lies in a specific chemical reaction called pyrolysis. What happens is, as the heat shield material, it's called AVCOAT, gets superheated, it actually turns into gas. Now that's a normal and expected part of the ablation process. But on Artemis I, this gas became the villain of the story. Okay, so let's just walk through this failure chain step by step. It all starts with the insane heating as Orion just slams into the atmosphere. This kicks off pyrolysis, producing gas inside the AVCOAT material. Now here's the crucial point. The material used on Artemis I had really low permeability, which is a fancy way of saying the gas couldn't escape. So this trapped gas created immense pressure, building up from the inside until, pop, the outer char layer just cracked and broke right off. But wait, the material itself wasn't the only culprit here. In a really strange twist, an innovative flight path, one that was designed to make the landing more precise, actually made the problem much, much worse. This maneuver is called the skip reentry. The best way to think of it is like skipping a stone across a pond. The Orion capsule was designed to dip into the upper atmosphere to slow down, then use its aerodynamic lift to literally bounce back out into space for a little bit before plunging back in for the final, super accurate landing. So why was this such a problem? Well, for one, it created this punishing heating, cooling, reheating cycle. The investigation found that during that cool phase of the skip, when Orion was briefly back out in space, the gas pressure inside the shield just kept building. This whole thermal cycle also made the AVCOAT material more brittle, essentially pre-stressing it right before the final, most intense part of reentry. It was just the worst possible combination for this particular material. So, with the problem finally understood, NASA was faced with this monumental decision for Artemis II, the first flight with a crew on board. How do you fix a flawed heat shield that is already permanently bonded to the spacecraft? The answer was as pragmatic as it was bold. They wouldn't. Instead of a hardware replacement, which would delay the whole program for years, NASA decided to change the mission's trajectory. They're going to fly with the known flawed heat shield, but they're going to change the environment it experiences on the way home. This table really shows the stark difference. That skip entry on Artemis I was longer, and it created that dangerous thermal cycling, all for the sake of a pinpoint landing. Now, for Artemis II, this new lofted entry is much shorter. It's going to hit the shield with a steady, high heat flux, but it comes at the cost of a much less precise landing zone. So the crucial point is this. The new, steeper path is designed to keep the pressure on, so to speak. By getting rid of the skip and shortening the whole reentry time, the goal is to prevent those pyrolysis gases from building up to the point where they can crack the shield. It's basically an operational workaround for a hardware problem. But let's be real, this fix is a mitigation, not a complete solution. And what it means is that the first crew to fly to the moon in over 50 years will be doing so with a system that has known vulnerabilities. This just raises the stakes to an absolutely extraordinary level. And not everyone is convinced this is the right way to go. A former astronaut and heat shield expert, Charles Camarda, has been a really vocal critic. He's called the shield a deviant system. That's a term used at NASA to describe a component that just isn't behaving the way it's supposed to. He's even drawn some pretty unsettling parallels to the lead-up to the Challenger and Columbia disasters, where engineering concerns were kind of pushed aside. And let's be crystal clear about what this means. The Artemis II crew is flying with this known issue. A fully redesigned heat shield, one made of AVCOAT with better permeability to let those gases escape, is already in the works, but it won't be ready until Artemis III. So this is the reality of the mission. The trajectory change is a mitigation, but you can't perfectly replicate the hellish conditions of a 25,000 mile per hour reentry in a ground test. It's impossible. And that separation bolt issue, it's been patched but not fully redesigned. Some outside experts have put the probability of a heat shield failure anywhere from a worrying 1 in 50 to a staggering 1 in 5. That enormous range just highlights how much uncertainty is still out there. Now, for its part, NASA and the Artemis II crew have expressed total confidence in this plan. They've run thousands of simulations, and they believe the new trajectory will keep the crew safe. As NASA's Moon to Mars program head Amit Kratria put it, the engineering supports the decision. But he also acknowledged the ultimate truth of the situation. The crew is going to put their lives behind that confidence.
And this really leaves us with a fundamental question, one that's at the heart of all exploration. The Artemis I test flight revealed a critical flaw that no ground test ever could have predicted. And now, the fix itself can only truly be proven by flying it. It's a paradox that has defined human spaceflight from the very beginning, and it's a stark reminder that every giant leap is taken right on the edge of the unknown.
After more than 50 years, we're finally bringing astronauts home from the moon. But to get there, the Artemis II crew has to survive what is, without a doubt, the most dangerous part of the entire mission, a 13-minute white-knuckle plunge through Earth's atmosphere.
Everything starts with this one number, 5,000 degrees. As Orion smashes into the atmosphere, it's going to heat up to temperatures about half as hot as the surface of the sun. Think about that for a second. This isn't just a simple re-entry. It is a literal trial by fire.
And that really gets to the heart of it. The flight director, Reid again, said it best. For 13 minutes, everything has to go right. There is absolutely no margin for error. Every single system, every part of the sequence, it all has to work perfectly. Because once they start this descent, there's no going back. It's a one-shot deal. Now, you'd think NASA has all this figured out, right? Well, that's where things get complicated. The confidence for this mission is kind of haunted by what happened with its predecessor. The uncrewed Artemis I flight came back with some really unexpected and, frankly, alarming damage to its heat shield. And that has created a whole cascade of problems that engineers are now scrambling to solve for this crewed flight.
I mean, just look at this. On the left, that's a separation bolt before the mission, looking all clean and perfect. And on the right, that's what it looked like after re-entry. It's melted, it's eroded, it's a mess. This was not supposed to happen. It wasn't just some minor surprise. This was a near miss that could have destroyed the whole capsule.
So when they dug into it, they found a bunch of things went wrong. Instead of the heat shield burning away smoothly like it was designed to, it experienced something called char liberation. Basically, chunks of it were literally breaking off. In more than 100 different spots, hot gases got trapped, causing the material to crack and chip away. And that's a huge problem.
And here's why this is such a big deal. Coming home from the International Space Station, from low Earth orbit, that's almost routine now. But coming back from the moon, that is a whole different ballgame. You're coming in nearly 7,500 miles an hour faster. That means you have almost double the kinetic energy to get rid of. And all that energy has to go somewhere. It turns into heat. A lot of heat. So what do you do when you find out your heat shield has a problem? Well, you change the entire plan. NASA ditched the original skip entry idea. It turns out that whole process of dipping into the atmosphere, heating up, then cooling off, it was actually making the heat shield material more brittle. So for Artemis II, they're going for a steeper, faster dive. It's a trade-off. They lose some landing accuracy, but they spend less time cooking in that intense heat.
So the stage is set. We have a crew, a slightly flawed heat shield, and a brand new plan. So how does this all actually play out? Let's walk through those final, critical moments of the journey home, minute by nail-biting minute.
Okay, here's the roadmap. The whole show, from the moment they separate from their service module to splash down, is about 34 minutes. But the part where everyone at Mission Control is holding their breath, that's the 13-minute atmospheric entry. And the really intense part, the peak danger, is compressed into just a few of those minutes. It all kicks off right here. The crew module, which has been their home for 10 days, separates from the big service module that gave it power and propulsion. And that's it. From this moment on, there's no turning back. They're basically a meteor, committed to the pull of gravity and their onboard computers. They are on their own. 20 minutes later, bam, they hit the upper atmosphere. The air around the capsule instantly superheats into a plasma sheath, and that bubble of glowing hot gas cuts off all communication with Earth. For 6 terrifying minutes, there's just silence. Imagine being inside, completely alone, riding a fireball across the sky with no way to talk to Mission Control. So while we're all worrying about the spacecraft and the heat shield, what's actually happening to the 4 astronauts inside? We can't forget about them because the physical toll of re-entry after 10 days in space is honestly just as dangerous as any mechanical problem. See, living in zero gravity for 10 days really does a number on the human body. Your blood volume actually drops, your heart muscle gets weaker because it doesn't have to pump against gravity. You even develop something called space anemia, which means you have fewer red blood cells to carry oxygen. So each of these astronauts is coming into this absolutely brutal re-entry in a physically weakened state. And this is the force they're about to face. At peak deceleration, they're going to feel 3.9 times the force of Earth's gravity. That's like having nearly 4 times your own body weight crushing you into your seat. For a body that's already deconditioned from spaceflight, that is a massive shock to the system. So what does that force actually do? Well, their weakened hearts have to struggle like crazy to pump that oxygen-poor blood up to their brains. And the biggest risk here is something called G-lock, or G-force-induced loss of consciousness. They could literally pass out at the exact moment they need to be the most alert in case something goes wrong.
Okay, so let's say they've made it through the fireball. They've survived the crushing G-forces. The capsule has slowed way down, but it's still hurtling towards the ocean at hundreds of miles per hour. Now comes the final act, and it's a mechanical ballet where every single step has to be perfect. At 8:03 p.m., the sequence kicks off. Bang! A cover is blown off. Then 2 small drogue chutes pop out to stabilize the capsule and keep it from tumbling. Then 3 pilot chutes deploy to pull out the 3 massive main parachutes. In just 4 minutes, this whole system has to slow this multi-ton spacecraft from over 300 miles an hour to a gentle 20 miles an hour for a safe splashdown.
And this right here is the moment everyone on planet Earth has been waiting for, the sight of 3 big, beautiful, fully inflated main parachutes. It's the first visual proof that the crew has made it through the fire and they're on their final gentle ride home.
And then, at 8:07 p.m., splashdown. You just have to pause and appreciate the history here. For the first time since December 1972, since the days of Apollo 17, human beings have returned to Earth from the Moon.
But you'd think it's all over now, right? Not quite. There's one last challenge. All that heat stored in the heat shield starts to soak back into the cabin. It can actually raise the temperature inside to a sweltering 111 degrees Fahrenheit. So they're basically sitting in a sauna while they wait for the recovery ship.
Okay, so let's quickly recap what we've learned. First, coming home from the Moon is way, way harder than from low Earth orbit. It's an enormous energy problem. Second, those unexpected flaws in the Artemis I heat shield forced NASA to switch to a riskier re-entry plan. Third, the crew goes through absolute hell up there, a communications blackout inside a plasma storm while their bodies are fighting against them. And finally, it all comes down to a perfectly timed parachute sequence to bring them home safe. So, the crew of Artemis II is home, and that's fantastic news. But that problem with the heat shield that they found on Artemis I, it hasn't just gone away. This flight gives them a ton of critical new data, for sure. But it leaves us with the biggest question of all. What changes do they need to make to finally conquer this fiery return before we can safely land humans on the Moon once again?
All right, let's just jump right in. Take a good look at this. This is the heat shield from the Artemis I mission. After it came back from the Moon, it is scorched, it's pitted, and yeah, those are literal chunks missing. Now technically, the uncrewed test flight was a success. But looking at this, you just have to wonder, what happens when there are 4 astronauts sitting inside and things don't go perfectly to plan?
See, to get to the Moon and back, the Artemis II crew, they're not just taking a trip. They're going to have to run a gauntlet. It's a whole series of life-or-death trials where their survival depends on thousands of different parts all working exactly right, from the second they lift off to the moment they splash down.
And this is the final boss. When that Orion capsule comes home, it's going to slam into the Earth's atmosphere at almost 25,000 miles per hour. I mean, that's so much energy it could literally melt rock. To survive, the crew has to put all their faith into systems that are facing one of the most extreme environments we've ever thrown hardware at. But you know what? That's the final challenge, the gauntlet. It starts way, way earlier.
Their very first trial is what I call riding the fire. The first 8 minutes of this mission are just pure violence. They are strapped to the top of what is, for all intents and purposes, a controlled explosion. This beast is NASA's Space Launch System, the SLS. It is the most powerful rocket we have ever built. And for the first 2 minutes of flight, more than 75% of all its power comes from those 2 huge solid rocket boosters on the side. Now that word solid, that is so important, because once you light the fuse on those things, there is no turning them off.
So, what happens if something goes wrong with that giant, uncontrollable rocket? Well, the crew's first and honestly most important line of defense is right here. See that pointy thing at the very, very top? That is the launch abort system.
The LAS is basically its own little rocket, a super powerful escape rocket that's just bolted to the top of the capsule. If the main SLS rocket starts to break apart or fail, the plan is for the LAS to fire and just violently rip the crew away from the disaster that's happening right underneath them. And here's the crucial part. This isn't some manual eject button. There's an autonomous emergency detection system that's constantly watching the rocket's health. It's designed to trigger that abort way faster than any human could ever react to an engine failure or a loss of control. But even that escape plan has its own risks.
NASA's even said that potential issues with Orion's batteries could mean they might not have enough power to get the capsule all the way to a safe splashdown after an abort. So you see, the escape itself is really only half the battle.
So, let's say they survive the launch, they make it through the fire. Now they enter the next phase of the gauntlet, the long night. The dangers out here are completely different. They're quiet. They're insidious. These are the perils of deep space.
So the first big test out in the black is a major one. After they do a couple of laps around the Earth to check out their systems, they have to fire their main engine. This is the burn that breaks them away from Earth and sends them out towards the Moon. But what if that engine just doesn't work right?
It's called the translunar injection burn, or TLI, and you can think of it as a hard go, no-go gate for the whole mission. If that engine cuts off early, or if it doesn't fire at all, the crew is just stuck. They'd be stranded in Earth orbit. Their moonshot would be over before it ever really started, and they'd have to use whatever fuel they have left just to figure out a safe way home.
Okay, but let's say the TLI burn is absolutely perfect. They're on their way, coasting toward the Moon. Now, a new problem pops up, one that actually happened on the uncrewed Artemis I mission. What happens if the lights just go out?
Get this. During the Artemis I mission, the Orion spacecraft had 24 separate power glitches that nobody commanded. They were basically like a circuit breaker in your house, tripping over and over again. And it turns out the culprit was space radiation. Now, flight controllers could reset the systems, sure, but every single time it happened, they lost a layer of backup, a layer of redundancy for critical hardware. You know, the stuff you need for propulsion and life support. NASA knows about this risk, and they're flying Artemis II anyway.
Power's one thing, but what if you're just cut off? Completely cut off from the entire planet? Total isolation, hundreds of thousands of miles away from a single other human being.
As Orion swings around the far side of the Moon, it's going to enter a planned communications blackout. For about 4.5 hours, they will have zero contact with mission control. No data, no voice, nothing. If any emergency happens in that window, a medical problem, a system failure, they are completely, utterly on their own.
Thankfully, they have an ace in the hole. It's this beautiful little trick of orbital mechanics called the free return trajectory. Basically, once they're on this path, the Moon's own gravity will literally grab their spaceship, swing it around, and fling it right back toward Earth, even if their main engine completely dies. It is the ultimate safety net. In fact, it's the exact same gravitational lifeline that saved the crew of Apollo 13.
But just getting back into Earth's neighborhood? Well, that's only the beginning of the end. Now comes the biggest trial by fire, re-entry. We're talking 13 minutes of pure, unadulterated hell.
You know, the Artemis II flight director, Jeff Radigan, he put it best. He said, it's 13 minutes of things that have to go right. And as that first Artemis flight showed us, there are just so many ways for things to go terrifyingly wrong.
And that brings us right back to the biggest worry of them all. The Artemis I heat shield was supposed to burn away smoothly. That's a process called ablation. But it didn't. Instead, in over 100 different places, chunks of the protective layer just broke off. This char liberation, as they call it, was totally unexpected, and it created a trail of high-speed debris that was following right behind the capsule.
And if that wasn't already scary enough, when they inspected the capsule after the flight, they found this. On the left, that's a separation bolt before the flight. On the right, that's what it looked like after. 3 of the 4 main bolts were melted and eroded. That created a gap that could have let 5,000-degree plasma sneak in behind the heat shield. And the Inspector General's own report warned that this kind of failure could lead to the breakup of the vehicle and the loss of the crew.
So just think about this. You've got a heat shield that's literally shedding chunks of itself and bolts that are melting away. So what's the very next critical system that has to work perfectly? The parachutes. They are absolutely essential for slowing down enough for a safe splashdown. So what if some of that debris had hit and damaged one of the parachutes? We'll actually never know for sure, because on Artemis I, the parachutes sank into the ocean before the recovery teams could even get to them to inspect them.
Okay, so after surviving the launch, deep space, fiery re-entry, the capsule finally splashes down in the Pacific Ocean. They're safe, right? Nope, not yet. The mission is not over until they are standing on the deck of a Navy ship.
Just look at this timeline for a second. After hitting the water, the crew could be stuck inside that bobbing capsule for up to 2 hours before anyone even opens the hatch. That is a long, tense wait in some pretty hazardous conditions.
And while they're waiting, they're facing these last few hurdles. The splashdown itself is going to be violent,
The capsule could even land upside down in a position they call stable 2, and they'd have to use airbags to flip it back over. And remember, after 10 days in zero gravity, the astronauts' bodies are totally deconditioned. Just feeling the pull of Earth's gravity again can be enough to make them faint. And they've got to deal with all that while they wait for Navy divers to get to them in the middle of the ocean.
You know, all of these risks, the batteries, the power glitches, and especially that heat shield, they are all known issues. And that leads to a final, really sobering question. Some critics, including former astronauts, have actually compared NASA's decision to fly with these problems to the kind of organizational pressures that led to the Challenger and Columbia disasters. So you have to ask, is history repeating itself? Or is this just the unavoidable price of pushing the boundaries of human exploration?
Okay, so let's get right into it. We're about to talk about one of the boldest human space missions in more than half a century. But really, at its core, this is a story about a very human calculation, balancing incredible risk against a truly historic reward.
And that really brings us to the central question we're going to explore. After the first uncrewed test flight came back with some, well, pretty serious issues, why would 4 astronauts agree to strap themselves into that same capsule for a trip around the moon? The answer? It turns out, it tells you everything you need to know about what it means to be an explorer.
To really get why they make that choice, you have to appreciate just how big of a moment this is. Think about it. It's been over 50 years since the last humans, the Apollo 17 crew, left lunar orbit. For my entire lifetime, and for many of yours, deep space has belonged to robots. Well, Artemis II is about to change all that.
So, who are these people leading the charge back out there? You know, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson probably said it best. He called them humanity's crew.
And here they are. You've got Commander Reid Wiseman, Pilot Victor Glover, and Mission Specialist Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen. This is the team, the 4 people whose job it is to prove that all this new hardware and this whole mission plan can actually and safely carry people to the moon and bring them home.
And this crew, well, it shows you just how much has changed since the Apollo days. This mission isn't just about technical firsts, it's about human firsts. We've got Christina Koch, the first woman to fly to the moon, Victor Glover, the first person of color, and Jeremy Hansen from the Canadian Space Agency, the first non-American. It's a whole new, more inclusive vision of who gets to explore the cosmos for all of us.
Okay, so what is this mission actually going to do? Well, it's not a landing. Not yet. It's a massive 620,000-mile, 10-day test flight, and it has a very, very specific job.
In engineering terms, they call this a shakedown cruise. Now, what's so fascinating about that is that the whole point of the mission is to find problems. Seriously, you push the spacecraft to its absolute limits out there in the brutal environment of deep space so you can discover all the flaws now before you try to actually land people on the moon.
And this is the flight path. It's just a beautiful piece of orbital mechanics called a free return trajectory. Basically, once Orion is on its way, the moon's gravity does the rest. It'll grab the capsule, pull it around the far side, and then just sling it right back toward Earth. It's a built-in safety feature, the very same trick that helped bring the Apollo 13 crew home safely.
But here's the thing. Built into this beautiful plan is also an architecture of risk. This is a test flight, after all, and the first uncrewed flight, Artemis I, showed us that some of the biggest dangers would pop up in those final fiery minutes of coming home.
So what are we talking about specifically? Well, the data from that first flight pointed to some very clear, very real dangers.
It all starts with just pure, mind-bending speed. The Orion capsule is going to slam into the atmosphere at Mach 33. That's 33 times the speed of sound. It's the fastest a crewed vehicle has come home since Apollo, and that kind of velocity creates an unbelievable amount of energy.
And all that energy has to go somewhere. It becomes heat. The surface of the heat shield is expected to hit about 3,000 degrees Celsius. That is literally half as hot as the surface of the sun. And this is where the main worry is.
See, on the Artemis I mission, the heat shield didn't behave quite like the models predicted. Instead of burning away nice and smoothly, chunks of the protective material just broke off. It's a phenomenon they're calling char liberation, and it happened in over 100 different places. If too much of that material breaks away, you could expose the capsule itself to catastrophic temperatures.
And look, this isn't just me speculating. A report from NASA's own Inspector General was brutally honest. They said that these anomalies, not just with the heat shield, but with bolts and power systems too, pose significant risks to the safety of the crew.
That concern was echoed by other experts too. Former astronaut and heat shield specialist Charles Camarda used one word to describe the system: deviant. That's a powerful word. It basically means its failure modes aren't fully understood. So with all these serious, known issues, the crew knew exactly what they were signing up for. Which brings us right back to that main question: why on earth would you do it? Well, the best answers I found come directly from the astronauts. It's a mindset, really. A mindset that understands that progress and risk go hand in hand.
Let's start with mission specialist Christina Koch. To her, all the inconvenience, the sacrifice, the risk, those aren't roadblocks. They're just the price of admission for exploration. You simply can't push the boundary without being willing to take on some risk. It's such a clear-eyed and powerful way to look at it.
Commander Reid Wiseman adds another really important layer. He said their allegiance wasn't just to their own mission, but to all the crews that will come after them. They're flying this risky test mission so that the astronauts on Artemis III and IV and so on will have a safer, more proven ride. They're literally the trailblazers.
And beyond all the tactical stuff, Wiseman also talked about a deeper, more human purpose. It's the hope that their journey might make the whole world just pause for a second and remember what a beautiful and special planet we all share. That's the kind of reward that explorers have been chasing for centuries. It goes way beyond just the hardware.
Because at the end of the day, this one single mission, with all of its built-in risks, is the key. It's the key that unlocks absolutely everything that comes next.
The whole Artemis campaign is about way more than just planting a flag. It's about testing the life support, the propulsion, all the systems you need for long journeys into deep space. It's about setting up a permanent human foothold on the moon. And ultimately, it's about using the moon as a stepping stone to prepare for that next giant leap, to Mars. And none of that happens without this first, crude test flight.
So when you look at it that way, the calculus becomes pretty clear. You have 4 people risking everything on one flight, flying into known dangers and who knows how many unknown ones. And they do it because this shakedown cruise, this single trip around the moon, it's the thing that proves we're finally ready to go everywhere else.